Let's get some analysis then. We're now joined via Zoom by political analyst Dr Metji Makgoba. A very good afternoon to you, Doctor. Thanks very much for joining us here on SABC News.
Good afternoon and thanks for having me.
Well, you're welcome. Zandile Gumede is now the new eThekwini regional chairperson. We now know that Mpumalanga ANC treasurer Mandla Msibi has agreed to stay away from all ANC activities whilst he was elected Mpumalanga treasurer. Now, it seems as though a lot is happening here within the ANC. We're going to be dealing with the issue of a step aside. Some are of the view that ANC eThekwini will in fact challenge this issue of step aside. How do you see all of this playing out?
I think the issue of step-aside rule is a complicated one because in the ANC there's a condition of corruption which is affecting the ruling party, but the step-aside rule does not deal with the condition of corruption, which means that the problem is still there and the solution that I've provided doesn't deal with what produces the problem. And what we see here, we see a disconnect between the institution and its own policies, which means that the policy of the institution is working one direction and the institution itself is working the other direction, which means that if the ANC wants to abolish all these complications, they have to understand what is the root cause of corruption within the movement. And that's where the idea of step-aside rule can be institutionalized. What we are seeing at the moment, we see contradictions and paradoxes within the ANC because you cannot say people must step aside when they've committed corruption, whereas the same root of corruption within the ANC have not been addressed.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, what happened in eThekwini is quite a big deal, given the fact that it did seem as though what has been called the Tumamina faction was starting to gain some momentum. We certainly saw that in Mpumalanga. And in fact, ANC President Cyril Ramaphosa going personally to go and close that conference, and quite jovial, I think, for him. We didn't see that happening this time around. But this is a clear indication of what's to happen in KwaZulu-Natal. And KwaZulu-Natal, of course, being a big province for the ANC. And one wonders, given that there is a clear message, what exactly is that message? You know, after you saw that Zandile Gumede's faction, and we're going to call it a faction, had a clean sweep really at this conference, what is the message that we now should be taking in?
I think in terms of the win, it shows that the Red Force is having a strong pushback, which means that Ramaphosa's faction is now threatened. And now this is going to embolden even the fight around the step-aside rule, because it might even be politicized, because if they see the fight back, it's getting stronger, and they might have to find ways of neutralizing the fight back. And one of the fight back might be to politicize the use of step-aside, because if Gumede has won that chairmanship, and she's still under investigation for allegations of corruption, the other faction or the opposing faction will have a strong hand to say, look, you need to face the allegations of corruption. And I think at the moment, the Ramaphosa faction, that's the only leverage they have against the Red Forces. And I think the complications is going to get worse and worse, because the step-aside rule, as I've said, doesn't address issues of corruption within the ANC. It actually reacts to larger pressures in society about the growing culture of corruption within the ANC. And until the ANC deals with the elephant of corruption within its institutional practices, these type of issues are going to happen, because now the culture says there's a deep-seated culture of corruption, but the solution that have been provided doesn't actually address that. It's actually saying corruption can take place, but those who commit corruption will have to step aside, which means that we're going to be seeing the contradiction between what the branches of the ANC are looking for and what its policies are saying. Because if the branches are saying Gumede is still a good member in standing of the ANC, then we must elect her. But on the other side, the same ANC says, look, this person is facing allegations of corruption, they must step aside. So until the issue of corruption is dealt with institutionally, all these paradoxes and contradictions are still going to affect the ANC. And what would that mean? It would mean that the step-aside rule is going to be politicized. It's not going to be necessarily be linked to ridding corruption within the ANC. It would mean that members of the ANC might start weaponizing the rule in order to score political points.
Dr. Makgoba, wouldn't you say that's already the case? I mean, some argue that the step-aside rule is already being used as some sort of a weapon. I mean, the fact that some are saying that the step-aside rule is already politicized. You mentioned the fact that one of the issues with a step-aside, or one of the problems with the step-aside rule, is that it doesn't address the issue of corruption within the ANC. While some are saying, well, it is in some ways, it is being used to deal with certain members, certain factions. And I wonder if there was uniformity, if then that step-aside rule would gain more respect and would be heard by all within the ANC. I mean, is it not already being used as a weapon?
I think, yes, it is being used, and that is the whole idea of politics, because it's all about balances of power and trying to remain one step ahead. And I think if the Ramaphosa faction understands that one of the ways of neutralizing its opponents is to enforce the rule, and they are going to take advantage of that. And worse is that they are not necessarily concocting charges against these members of the ANC. The charges are there. So it's just a matter of implementation. And I think what we need to see from the ANC is uniformity across board in terms of who is being accused of corruption and can the person step down. And as we've seen, there are a little bit inconsistencies with regard to that. And until the ANC carefully and critically ensures that this rule is implemented throughout, then we can say maybe it's been used to address corruption. But as at the moment, there are a lot of gray areas around this issue.
Yeah. All right, Dr. Makgoba, thanks very much for giving us your time here on SABC News. We certainly do appreciate it. And let's hope that we can unpack some more of these ANC issues as time goes on with you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
All right. That is Dr. Metji Makgoba, political analyst, weighing in for us on the issue of the ANC and step-aside, and certainly the goings-on in eThekwini as Zandile Gumede is indeed elected.